So welcome to another TC2, and we have Ari today. He's going to discuss about his journey with living with HIV. So how are you doing today, Ari?
I'm doing good. It's Tuesday. We're up. We're bright. We're sunny. Yes.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Ari Hampton. I'm from the east side of Detroit. Whoop, whoop. I'm a little mixed boy from the east side of Detroit. Like I said, 30 years old, so I'm not a little boy anymore. But yeah, so I have been living back in Detroit for going on 13 years now. I was born and raised here, but moved away when I was about 16, graduated down in Florida, lived across America. As the kids say it, I've toured. Had some life experiences and then ended up coming back to Detroit and had some more life experiences. So I work professionally for the Detroit STD program as a prevention counselor. So I oversee everybody's mental capacity, emotional capacity, try to help people out as much as just creating a prevention plan for themselves and how to keep themselves safe sexually. And then also I'm a HIV activist. I've done some activism work for the last 10 years around specifically young people living with HIV, comprehensive sexual education, rights for people of color, specifically LGBT populations, making sure that they're treated equally and have equity when it comes to healthcare systems.
So what got you into the field to begin with?
So I am a person of experience.
Okay.
I've never went to college. I advocate for school. You know, if you want to go to school, please go get your education, do what you need to do. I graduated high school thinking that I was going to be a marine biologist.
Okay.
So I love fish. I love water. I'm a Cancer. Whoop, whoop. But I got into the field by just life experience.
Okay.
About the age of 17 is when I started to really have an understanding of my attraction to males. And I thought that I was bisexual at the time. And so, you know, I didn't understand what sexuality really was.
Right.
Other than men are pretty, so are women. And so I went to a community center down in Florida called CONVO'S, which is a wonderful LGBT center. Met some fantastic folks that kind of helped me through my LGBT experience in life and coming out. And then I also met one specific individual who was living with HIV.
Okay.
And so that individual ended up passing away, and I had no education what HIV was.
Right.
And so at the age of 17, I started doing prevention work, outreach more so, just educating myself and then educating younger people about what HIV was and just to get the knowledge out there. So that kind of started me in the field a little bit. Fast forward into 2009 when I moved back in 2008. I met a guy.
Okay.
We asked me on a date, and I was like, sure. You know, we went down to the riverfront at the Renaissance Center and had dinner on the patio. It was really nice, and as we were talking and just kind of like kicking it by the water, he disclosed that he was HIV positive.
Okay.
And so knowing what I knew and educating myself a little bit, I wasn't afraid to date somebody living with HIV. I was just a little bit more cautious of just keeping myself safe and, you know, making sure that I didn't acquire the virus just because I knew people that passed away and stuff. So I wanted to stay safe and, you know, respect him at the same time.
Right.
So we ended up dating more. It got really well. We ended up living together. You know, how relationships progress and stuff like that. And it was to a point where he bought an engagement ring that I knew of.
Okay.
And so the day he was going to propose is also the day that I found out he cheated on me. Okay. So it turned really quickly. I wanted to end the relationship. And in that moment, he kind of flipped mentally when I said that I wanted to end it because of the affair that he had. And it became a physical fight that broke out because I wanted to leave. And so we started fighting. It was interesting because I grew up in a household where my father beat my mother. And so, and not just her, but the kids as well, us. And so I always made a commitment that I would never put my hands on my partners. No matter what was happening, you know, I'm big as hell. I'm 6'5". So if anything, I will shake you up. You know, that's the best thing I can do for you.
Right.
So I'll shake you down. But he ended up biting my hand, which caused me to kind of react in that moment, and I hit him in the mouth.
Okay.
And when that happened, he kind of had this zombie moment where he kind of like and latched onto my chin with his mouth, bleeding profusely out of his mouth, and latched onto my chin, and we tussled some more. I kind of like tried to get him off of me, and in the midst of me trying to get him off of me, he bit half of my chin off.
Oh my God.
So I always wear this beard now, but I have a scar that's here for the rest of my life, and that's because half of this was missing. Got stabbed in my leg, hit with a stool in my head.
All this happened that night?
That day, yes. And so it was really bad. You know, it got to a point where I had butcher knives in my hands, locked them out the house, trying to just
protect yourself.
I knew what was going to happen, because if he came back in that house at that point, being stabbed and everything else, it was literally, it's me or you.
Right.
And I knew one of us was going to jail and one of us was going to die if he came back in the house.
Right.
And so the next knock I heard on the door was the paramedics. So they had called the police. We were living in Ypsilanti at the time. The paramedics came, and as soon as I opened the door for them, their faces just broke. Like, mouths dropped to the ground. They were like, "You need to go look in the mirror." And so when I went and looked in the mirror, that's when I realized that half of my chin was gone. Yeah, I didn't know at the time. Adrenaline was popping, you know, everything else. So that was the realization that, shit, you know, I'm possibly exposed now.
Right.
Because I knew he was living with HIV. We used condoms all the time, you know, protected myself, went to his doctor's appointments, made sure he was taking his meds, he was healthy, everything else. And everything was cool. I tested, it was negative, everything else. But until that moment, I knew that my life was possibly going to change at that moment. Okay. And so after the paramedics got there, they were treating me a little bit. The cops came, and it's white police officers out in Ypsilanti. So the first thing that they said was, "Oh, this is some gay shit."
Really?
Yeah, this is some gay shit. Apparently, I was the 5th person that this altercation happened with the same person. So there was 5 individuals. Well, there was 4 individuals before me that had went through something similar. That the cops,
this particular
person that the cops had to be called out to, and come to find out, the person was mentally not stable. Okay. He was also not only living with HIV, but he was not the healthiest, and so he was in the latent stage of HIV, which is called AIDS. Okay. So I did not know all of that until after all of this happened. And, you know, the police were completely shitheads. They told me that there was nothing that they were going to do for me because I was gay.
So they did make
no police report, nothing.
They discriminated against this situation, even though it was a domestic violence, obvious domestic violence situation. Yeah.
So in that moment, I was blamed, even though I was the victim, because I was gay. Okay. And they told me that they didn't want that gay shit in Ypsilanti. So they told me, because my ID said Detroit, that the person that attacked me, my partner at the time, had to drive me back home. Wow. So they forced him to take me back to Detroit, and told him that he was not going to go to jail, but he had to leave the state of Michigan. And that was the justice that I got out of that situation.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you feel a lot of times, especially in the LGBT community, I feel, but I want to hear from you, that we do get discriminated when situations like this, especially the bad domestic violence situation where a person may need to have charges pressed against them, PPOs brought in. Do you think that they do treat us differently because of that?
Yeah, and here's the thing. So they definitely do. They treat us completely differently. I think we have been trying to make strides in there. I think Danny Woods, shout out to her at the DPD, you know, she's been really working her butt off trying to make sure that there's an inclusive training that happens for the Detroit Police Department. But that's only Detroit. Right. I will say I am a kid that is a PK. My parents were Wayne County Sheriff's officers, both my mom and my dad. Okay. My brother too, actually. So I come from a family of cops, sheriff's officers, and I always had a respect for the law, but I also knew how the law treated people of color, specifically people of color who are LGBT.
Correct.
And so there's always been this distrust. There's always been this, you know, even if you are the victim, you're still going to be perpetuated as this assailant that has violated something.
You're almost like you asked for it because of the fact that you're gay.
Yeah. So when that moment happened, I wasn't surprised, especially because the Ypsilanti, especially because these are white officers. And even though I look white, you know, once you start hearing me talk and, you know, you see where I'm coming from and everything else, you're like, oh, you got something in the milk.
So you get lumped right in.
Yeah, you get lumped right in. Because the moment that they spot that you have some type of person of color blood in you, you're lumped in that group of you're a person of color.
Right.
And so we really don't care that much. So they made him take me back home. I waited about, I got tested a month after.
Okay.
It was very difficult because my family did not know he was living with HIV.
Okay.
And that was a secret that I had kept from everybody, my friends, my family, everybody. And so I had to come out of the closet about dating somebody that was living with HIV, which I was scolded for. Because, you know, people care, but at the same time, I think people lack of education.
I was going to say, I think because what year was this?
This was 2009.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think now, here in 2019,
it's a little bit different.
It's getting a little bit different. I think because us really having the U=U campaign and people really pushing about viral suppression and us getting more awareness out there about it. I think that is helping with people not think anymore that if you have HIV, or as most people want to put the blanket statement, AIDS, that it's a death sentence now.
Well, and that's the thing is, I, to be honest, I wasn't the most confident person or the most understanding because I was living with shame myself.
Right.
When I came out of the closet down in Florida, I was living with my dad. That was the only really family that I had. And when I came out of the closet, me and my dad didn't have the best situation. It got very violent, and it got to the point where honestly there was a knife put to my chest. And so, you know, I had to make the decision to leave home at the age of 18. As soon as I turned 18, I was like, this is it. I graduated. I turned 18. I'm an adult. I gotta go. You know, I took the beatings as long as I could.
Right.
And so when I did come out of the closet, the statement he gave me was I was going to get AIDS and die. So dating somebody living with HIV was shameful to me.
Right.
Although, you know, I loved him. You know, don't get me wrong. You know, I loved the hell out of that man.
Right.
But I was still ashamed because it was that dirty secret that this could be a reality that nobody wants for me.
Exactly.
And they feel like I chose this at some point. Even though it's not, you know, you try to do what you can.
I don't think anybody chooses.
Love is love,
right.
You know.
And you don't choose who you fall in love with.
Yeah. And so, you know, that was the shame that I had to live with in coming out of the closet about dating somebody living with HIV and then being physically attacked in the manner that I was. That was shameful within itself because it was that time that I had to kind of mourn the loss of a relationship, mourn myself that just went through something, and then also have to prepare myself for whatever may come.
Exactly.
And so back then we still had to, you know, during the face of HIV back in 2009, you had to wait 3 months before you could even find out if you were HIV positive.
Right.
It's not like today where you can the window period's 2 weeks. You know, you have unprotected sex, you have some type of experience, you got 2 weeks, bring yourself in, get tested. It's easy, simple. We'll see what's going on.
Right.
Back then, you had to wait the months, you know, and I got tested the month after. I was negative. And I was happy, you know, I was like, oh God, thank you, Jesus. You know, maybe I missed it. You know, maybe this didn't happen to me.
Right.
And something told me, no, in 2 more months, go get tested. It was like this voice that I could hear that was just like, so even when I slept with other guys, you know, used condoms in that moment and stuff like that afterwards, it was still like this nagging voice that was just saying 2 more months, 2 more months, 2 more months. So when those 2 months came, my sister took me to affirmations, and there was a lovely, lovely counselor by the name of H.E.R who worked for AIDS Partnership in Michigan, who's unified now. And she gave me the results that I was HIV positive.
Okay.
In that moment, the best way I can describe it is if you can picture the world as a globe, as a piece of glass, and you see it just shatter in front of your life, in front of your eyes, period. That's what I saw.
Wow. All
the possibilities of what I could do. You know, I'm also a person that my family served in the military. dad and grandfather and my uncles too, and I wanted to serve.
Okay.
And I cried so hard because I knew I couldn't serve my country.
Right.
And that hurt my heart because that was something that, you know, not everybody agrees with it, but I think, you know, if you are a person that serves in the military, thank God for you. Because for the freedoms that we do have, you know, it's a blessing. It's
well,
a curse too, but it's a blessing.
I just think, even though if it wasn't the military, just having to make those life adjustments now, for over a situation that you didn't ask for.
I didn't ask for this, and when I tested positive, I remember going to my first appointment for my confirmatory results. When you test, so when you get an HIV test, those are just to see if you've been exposed to HIV. The secondary test is called confirmatory testing. And that's really like blood work to see what's going on inside of your system. And that's to see if there's actual HIV components inside of your blood. And so when I went to follow up with the doctor at the time, they first sent me to a doctor that only saw pregnant women.
Okay.
So I was the only man in a waiting room with a bunch of pregnant women who were living with HIV that I didn't know. But you know, the doctor told me, oh, I see HIV positive patients all the time, even though they're pregnant women, I can treat you too. And I was like, well, what? And so, but he told me that there was no possible way that I have gotten HIV the way that I told him I got it, which was through the bite.
Right.
And he shamed me. He told me that I got it. Back in the day, they categorized the way that you got HIV in 2009. So there was the good forms of HIV, which is like you were born with it, or it was a blood transfusion or something of that nature. And then there was behavioral bad ways that you got HIV, which is unprotected sex, you know, homosexual sex, all this other stuff, or injection drug use. And so they put you in these categories. And I remember just sitting there being told that I was a part of this category that was behaviorally bad.
Wow.
And I kept adamantly saying, no, I know I didn't get HIV this way.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if I did get it through sex. Why would that make it bad? Because at the end of the day, I never asked for this.
So again, you was getting stigmatized again about
being
gay.
Yeah.
Again. Yep. And this was being brought into your care.
Yeah. And you know, it was interesting because the one thing I will say that the doctor did do well was he realized that there was some mental components that I was dealing with. And I didn't even realize the level of PTSD that I had.
Because that was my next thing I was going to ask you.
I was walking around, even before HIV, I was walking around with levels of PTSD that I didn't really understand.
Well, you was dealing with it from your dad.
Yeah. You know, growing up, I remember there was an experience with my dad that, you know, my mom and my dad split up. My dad wanted to move to Florida, and he wanted for me to go with him. And I said, no, I wanted to stay with my mom just because of the experiences I've had. I didn't want to be alone without my brother and sister. And it was just me and him. Because I feared that I didn't know it was the unknown. I didn't know what was going to happen. And so I remember in that moment, him beating me to the point where I looked like a white version of Emmett Till after he got beat.
What?
My nose was twisted. It was that bad. And so I was always walking around with fear, you know, and when I did leave my dad's home, there was another experience that happened that created some levels of uncomfort with being around people or dating folks. I was sexually assaulted by the person I was dating.
Wow.
You know, and I was told by my friends that because I was dating him that it wasn't sexual assault, even though I told him I didn't want it. And he still forced himself. And
I think that's the thing. Yeah. People don't realize, even though you may be in a relationship with somebody, if you tell them this is not going down, people have to respect that.
Yeah.
You know?
And so I think that's why I got so close with the guy that was going to propose to me, was because he understood that hurt that I came from.
Oh, he presented
that he understood.
That he understood.
And I think there was forms of him that he could relate to that.
Right.
And that he could understand where I was coming from as far as somebody that was guarded, somebody that was unable to trust so quickly, you know.
So my next question is back to the partner that this happened.
Yeah.
Did you ever find out if he had a past history with any type of domestic violence or abuse?
So yes. So he, like I said, there was 4 other individuals before then. The person he cheated on me with was his ex that stayed below in the apartments in Ypsilanti.
Wow.
In the process of the fight that happened between me and him, he also attacked them. the ex-boyfriend and the person that he was with at the time. And he bit half of the finger off of one person.
Oh, he was a biter.
Yeah. And so I remember a year later, let's just fast forward, a year later, I was really struggling. Like when I got the diagnosis, I curled up into a ball for about a week and laid on the floor. Like my sister and my mother, thank God for them, because they were there for me. Even though they didn't have the education, they were there for me.
Right.
And so it was quite difficult for me to accept that news, because it was hard. You know, I tried it's like when you sit there and you try to do everything you possibly can and it still happens. Right. And so you have to deal with that mentally. And I didn't have the tools, but I tried to do the best that I could in that moment. And so a year later, I remember turning to my faith again, because I had stopped believing in God for a good second there. And once I started praying again, I had an opportunity where that person came back into my life. Okay. And it was funny because I was on a Adam for Adam, a gay dating site, and there was no profile picture of him, but he hit on me. And I remember him hitting on me, and I was like, why does his statistics of his body and his waistline and everything else familiar? Like, this, I know this person. Right. Like something in my spirit has always been like, I know this person. And I was like, Ivan? And it clicked. And he was like, oh shit. And so I was like, here's my number, call me. And I purposely wanted to do that because I felt like that was God's opportunity of letting me heal by letting him know
what he did
and where I'm at in my life now.
Right.
And so we had that conversation. He was in denial, you know, of course, sitting there saying, no, you could have got it from anybody. Right. But then after the more we talked about it and the situation that happened and everything else, he admitted that, you know, he was violent towards his other partners and everything else, and that he wasn't taking care of his health, and he had AIDS. And, you know, all of this truth came out. And so, you know, said my piece, told him to have a great life, and we kind of walked away at that point.
So were you able to get healing from that, with that type of
a little bit. Okay. You know, it was just, it's still, HIV is a lot more mental with things. And especially like back in 2009, the education really wasn't there. No. You know, it really, and let me just put it in this degree, like in 2009, I was 20 before I was diagnosed with HIV. And so I remember going to the doctors. I was eventually transferred over to Horizons Project, which is one of the only adolescence clinics in southeastern Michigan. Since 1994, Dr. Catherine Wright, God bless her heart, she started this organization, really seeing that young kids living with HIV were not being treated properly, specifically LGBT kids. And she really like stepped up and created this program with Children's Hospital. And so it's not just a clinic where you're seeing just for HIV, you're seeing as a whole patient. You know, they have people that deal with your mental aspects. They have people that are case managers, people that help you with insurance, meds. So it's wraparound service. All around. Okay. They treated you as a whole being. Well, I think
that's how you have to do it, because you have to encompass the whole person. And look at whatever barriers that they have, so those things can be addressed, because if they're not, a lot of times.
And that's where we've moved to today. Right. We have that clear understanding. But back then, you know, it was in 2009, they still wanted you to become sick before they gave you antiretroviral medications. And I thank God for, and I thank my mother for making me so headstrong and stubborn, because I'm like, you know, I always wanted to, okay, this is what I'm living with. Now that I've cried over it, how can I live with this? Right. What is it doing to my body first? What's happening in there? And then how can I do what I need to do for myself? And so I remember advocating towards my doctors, and they would argue with me saying, no, you don't need to start meds now. And I remember at that young age, hell no. Why would you let me get sick first before you put me on meds? Exactly. Put me on the meds that prevent me from becoming sick. And that ultimately helps me. And so I pushed hard as I could, and they gave me my meds. And thank God that they did, because 10 years later, I've been undetectable this whole time. And, you know, I to my knowledge, never transmitting the virus. I've had negative partners. I've been with a guy, I'm single now, but I was with a guy for 8 years, and there was times where we didn't use a condom sometimes. You know, shit happens. You in that peace, in that passion, you know. And he's still negative, you know.
Right.
I kept him safe because I kept myself safe and kept myself healthy. And
so moving forward, how have you been as far as disclosing to the people that you dated?
So originally disclosure was hard as hell. You know, how do you sit there and tell somebody, hey, I have something, you know, and
that could be life altering.
Yeah, life altering, because when you think about it, think about like the beginning of my story where I was ashamed of dating somebody living with HIV.
Right.
And so I could, even if people can accept you sexually, even if they can accept you dating wise, they still have a whole life that encompasses as well. And so that comes with family being worried. That comes with friends being worried, you know, a lot of different aspects. And so I didn't know how to disclose other than just kind of like waiting for that moment. As soon as I saw that sex was on the table, it was like, okay, hey, let me let you know. But I got tired of that at some point. You know, it's like a little piece of me was being ripped away every time I had to disclose to somebody. And I didn't feel whole. Even if there was a relationship that happened or anything of that nature, I felt that you were sorry for me, or you had to take special precautions for me or something of that nature. And I'm like, no, I'm still a whole human being.
Exactly.
Like I'm not a walking virus. And so I got to a point where I was just like, I'm fucking over this shit. And I came out publicly about it. I think what ended up happening was I went to go get my meds at my pharmacy, and one of the pharmacists was like, hey, your HIV meds are ready. And that was in the neighborhood that I was staying in the hood. And so that got kind of spread around a little bit.
Okay.
And so at that moment, it was kind of like,
either you tell or everybody else is just going to run around.
Because,
and then, you know, if they tell it, it's not going to be nice.
It's not going to be nice. And I already had friends that down in Florida that that are no longer my friends. That once they found out I was positive, went around saying that I got HIV from being a prostitute. All this stuff. Like even people that had parents that passed away still stigmatized me. And it was weird because I think being gay, when you come out of the closet, that's one trial.
Right.
Then being feminine as a gay man is another trial. And then sitting there and being HIV positive is a whole new test and trial that you don't know about.
Right.
And the way that I saw a lot of my so-called friends turn their backs on me when I came out about being positive. That hurt. I think that hurt most of all. Yeah. Because it was people that you thought loved you.
Right.
And it was the reality of things, you know. As I've done this work, I understand that it's education. You know?
I think that's
it's
key.
Ignorance and it's education and all that other stuff. But I also think the human part of me is saying that you're just a bunch of shitheads.
Because I don't care. Sometimes you can give people all the knowledge in the world, but if their fear is so much greater than taking that education in and being more aware of, you know, the whole HIV process and everything.
And a lot of times
people just are not going to change how their opinions already set.
And a lot of times the sad fact of the matter is, you know, people have this tendency of being on edge of waiting for you to fall, waiting for something to drop so that they can use it against you. Which is really sad because it's always been, you know, my dad always said that, you know, sometimes you will find in this world that people have this crab in a barrel mentality. When they see a crab trying to move out the barrel, the other crab reaches up and pulls them down by the leg. Instead of letting the crab get up and then reaching up and pulling you up. You know, I see people do that a lot of times, which is really sad.
It is sad. Because we should be working together.
You know? And, you know, even in our own community, you know, we've had so many young babies that we've lost. So many young girls we've lost. It's just sad that we're there for each other when someone dies. But
we're not there when the person is here. And we see the problems there and we don't want to address it. We'd rather take a blind eye.
And that's what happened for a lot of years. You know, before I got into this work professionally, I've only been doing this work for about 7 years professionally here in Detroit. The beginning of those years was me dealing with my mental aspects. I tried to commit suicide 3 times. And when I say I tried, I literally took a whole bottle of methadone and downed it with a 50 ENJ.
Well,
by
see,
the grace
you know
of God,
what?
still
Well,
here.
no, because he had work. He needed you to finish.
Yeah,
and that's why you weren't going nowhere right now.
I was dealing with some stuff, you know, and I was also a person that it was hard trying to find work back in the day. You know, jobs wasn't here like it was back in the day, like it is now. You know, jobs really were scarce, and so I turned to sex work.
Okay.
And sold my body, you know. I did what I had to do to pay bills. You know, it wasn't to just sit here and floss. I literally was paying bills. I was paying my mama's bills with doing sex work. Okay. And it's something that I wasn't too proud of, but at the same time, hell, if I can make this dollar to pay these bills, I'm proud of that too. Exactly. You know, so I wasn't too ashamed by it, but you know, it was something I've kept kind of quiet for a long time. And so
sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Our survival skills have to kick in.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, I don't judge nobody, because at the end of the day, you never know what has everybody done in their life. Yeah,
that's it, until you walk into that person's shoes.
Yeah, and so, you know, thank God I was working, I was with my clinic, and I remember them calling me one day, Monique Green-Jones, who works for Horizons Project, God bless you, baby. But she called me up one day and said, hey, somebody backed out from doing this public speaking gig. We're having a fundraiser for the clinic. Would you mind coming and just talking? And I really wasn't ready. I really was not ready to share my story or to tell the world that I was living with HIV. Right. But I felt, because I had knew so many people that were living with HIV, that if this was the opportunity that God gave me, I had to make a stand, not just for me. It was more about the rest of our community than it was for me. And so that's at that first moment I got up and I spoke, it hit me and I was like, oh wow, so this is what it's about. So then that's when you realized. It was like, it was an aha moment. It was this moment of saying, there is something bigger than you in this life. And no matter what you're dealing with, you can leave something behind. Right. Because here's the thing. We have a lot of great strides in HIV. The medicine is really great. You know, it keeps people long, healthy lives and everything else. But the difference is, you know ultimately what might take you out when you're living with HIV. You kind of stare death in the face every day. And so in that moment, when you face your own mortality, you have a deeper appreciation of life. Right. You know, it's kind of like all the stupid bickering bullshit that people do in life. It's not worth it. It's minute. You know, life is short. We don't know. We can go out here every day and you might walk out your door and get hit by a car or something. You don't know. So the best thing you can do is just love on people while you're here, make a difference, give somebody a smile. Do what you can, you know, share some sunlight in somebody's life, because we all frowning, we all going through a bunch of bullshit that we don't ask for. Right. And so if we can just show that appreciation towards one another, lift each other up, you know, I think there can be a difference. And so I think that's where my healing started. My healing started with this work, you know, was sharing my story. And then thank God for Horizons Project for giving me a job, because I worked all these odd jobs. You know, I was a manager at Domino's. I worked at Starbucks. I worked for the VA. I did all this craziness beforehand. I was even a drag queen at one point. So I did all these odd things, but I think ultimately coming into this field, I was not expecting to work in the field of HIV. I didn't want to work in the field of HIV because I mean, honestly, like if I did work in the field of HIV, I wanted to work in a clinic aspect where I was just helping folks that were living with HIV. And Monique Green-Jones saw something different in me and said that I think you working with populations that are at risk for HIV to help them prevent from becoming infected can make the world of a difference. And so I got into prevention work and started going to churches. I went to churches, I went to schools, I went to community block parties. I went to things that people didn't think that I was going to go to. You know, the places that usually you turn people like me away from. Right. And I was like, no. I have this smile on my face, and I know how to hustle because I'm from the east side of Detroit. So we gonna make this work. And I would literally talk to these heterosexual populations and have them have this clear understanding of how HIV is not a viral issue; it's a social issue, and how it affected more than the people than they thought. You know, the very first person that I knew was living with HIV was my godbrother, who was a straight man. Okay. He died from complications due to HIV. And that was back in the 90s, before we even really knew. And so that was my first experience of what the virus did to the Black community.
Right.
Not the gay community, the Black
community. And see, and that's another thing I don't like right now is that they're not putting enough attention on our whole demographic. Yeah. They're only segregated our Black women. They have segregated our elder. Their focus is just on what they consider the at-risk. Yeah. And it honestly, it's our whole population that really needs to be aware of what's going on. Can you briefly, just tell the difference between HIV and AIDS? Because one thing I think with trying to, divert people from the stigmatization that they have about HIV is knowing what the difference is between the two of those.
Yeah. So here, I'll make it as simple as possible. You get HIV. If you don't do the things that you need to do, like taking your meds, going to see your doctor to make sure that your viral load, which is the amount of virus inside of your system, and your CD4, those are your helper cells. Those are your T cells. Those fight off your common colds and flus and stuff. So if your common colds, if your CD4 cells are really low, your viral load is really, really high, then that means that your system is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And so that can lead you into a stage which is called the latent stage of HIV, which is AIDS. They're not two separate things. AIDS is a condition. HIV is the virus. You have to have HIV in order to have an AIDS diagnosis if you don't do the things that you need to do. That can also come around from having different opportunistic infections. So I think there's about 26 different opportunistic infections, and those are like PCP pneumonia, cancer, lymphoma, stuff like that. So if you have those things, those are very aggressive on the immune system, and so those can push you into where your body functions start shutting down, your organs start shutting down. You do not die from HIV. You die from complications due to the illness that you have acquired, like PCP pneumonia or cancer or something of that nature. HIV is just that layer that basically is stripping away that fighting system inside of your system that fights off like colds, flus, stuff like that. So if your system is really, really low, where it's not able to fight off multiple infections or multiple diseases, then that can pretty much take you out.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Because I just, to me, like we said, education is key. Yeah. And if people don't know, what this stage is and what that stage is, I think that's where people are still getting stuck at looking at HIV as AIDS, that is still a killer virus.
And that's the thing. Language matters. Language freaking matters. I am not living with AIDS. I'm living with HIV. And even if I had an AIDS diagnosis, I still would not like to be known as a person living with AIDS, because I'm living with HIV. It's just a condition that happened because my system was really bad. So, and here's the thing, you can come up out of that condition. Even if you do get an AIDS diagnosis, if you take care of yourself with the doctor's help and treatment and everything else, you can reverse that condition. You can come up out of AIDS diagnosis. Right. So a lot of people don't know that, and I think that's where we need to start having honest conversations, not just all positive people, but negative folks too and everything else, so we can start breaking the stigma. And I
think everybody needs to have this conversation. It needs to be an everybody conversation, because either way it goes, depending if you fall in love with somebody and they may have it, that may impact you on some level, or you may have a family member. Yeah, and knowing the tools that are out here to help you. Thank God for the way that technology has moved, because now we have PrEP. And if you don't know what PrEP is pre-exposure prophylactics. That's the fancy way to say it. But basically, think of PrEP as what you do before sex. It's a once-a-day pill that you take, and it basically builds up a layer of immunity to the HIV virus. So if you do come across it and you're doing what you're supposed to do on that medication, it'll be basically like rubber and glue. It bounce off of you. Right. So that's kind of like the phenomenal thing about PrEP. But it's not just PrEP. There's PEP as well. And PEP has been out for years. And the thing I sometimes it makes me shed a tear is I wish that the police that dealt with me in that scenario that I had would have been educated. And I fought them, but I don't fault them, because I feel like they lack the education about PEP as well. Because I was gonna say, back in 2009 though, there was not too much conversation around that. And then I think too, the way that the medication was being marketed at that time, it wasn't being marketed to everybody.
And so just so everybody knows, PEP is the sister treatment to PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis. No, post-exposure prophylaxis, my bad. So you got pre-exposure prophylactics, which is PrEP, and then post-exposure prophylactics, which is PEP. So, or MPEP. And MPEP has been used in hospital settings, and it also has been used for sexual assault victims as well. So if any young girl came in saying that she was sexually assaulted or raped, they would do a rape kit on her, if she allows that, and then they would also give her an MPEP treatment, which would block out the HIV virus if she has been exposed to that. And the thing is, they don't offer that to gay men a lot of times because they feel like gay men are men, and so you can't be raped. Yes, you can. And you know, sexual assault happens to everyone. And if you ever feel like you've been exposed to HIV, please know MPEP works. You have 3 days, that's 72 hours from that exposure period to make it down to a emergency room or a facility that, like a local health department, like the Detroit STD clinic, and we can go ahead and offer you the MPEP treatment. It's a cocktail of pills that you take for 28 days, and that basically blocks out the HIV virus if you have been exposed. So those are some phenomenal options that are just, you know, don't ever feel like you're stuck. Don't ever feel like you've had an experience and you're like, shit, now this is basically my life.
Right.
There's options for you. You know, it's not how it was back in the day. I wish I would have had these options. You know, I know PrEP is something that people, a lot, especially for the gay males, you know, it's something that a lot of people are afraid of, but don't be afraid of it. If it's an option that you can make work for your life, I wish I had PrEP out when I was negative, you know, because I wouldn't be in this experience.
Right. So now, I know you were saying you're not really dating anybody at this present time, but if and when you decide, which I'm quite sure you will eventually, because you're such a handsome guy.
I'm always dating.
Has that been a conversation with any of your partners?
So the weird thing is, like, because I'm an HIV activist, I am completely out about my status.
Right.
I went publicly worldwide about my status a couple years ago. And I did that because I wanted to create a conversation for not just negative people, but I wanted to show a face from my positive brothers and sisters. I wanted you to see that HIV looks like anybody, that you can look healthy. You know, I've had people sit there and be like, oh, you don't even look like you got HIV.
Right.
Because HIV really doesn't have any symptoms or signs. True. The only way you really know is unless you get tested. Exactly. So, you know, there is no face to HIV. There is only health. There is only taking care of yourself. And it's not just HIV. That goes for cancer, diabetes. That goes for anything. You know, you got to take care of your health. And so I wanted to be that voice for the voiceless. I wanted to show my face because I felt like there was a lot of people that were my friends that didn't feel comfortable to do that, but they wanted their voices heard. And so if I could be that vessel for you, because I didn't give a fuck to say my status. Right. I wanted to make that possible, but so it's a double-edged sword because I help a lot of people and people love the work that I do, and people come up to me and, oh, you're so courageous and everything else. And it's easy for me to disclose my status sexually. So thank you God for that. Because I'm like, hey, I'm positive, deal with it.
Right.
You know, I live fabulously with HIV. But there has been a few times where I'm dating a guy and I'm not fully respected because they can accept that I'm HIV positive. What they can't accept is that I'm public about my HIV.
Right.
Because then their family knows. Then their work knows.
And their friends know.
Then their friends know. And so then people question them, well, are you positive?
Right.
And even if they are or if they're not, it's nobody's fucking business.
Exactly.
You know, that's between me and you. And so I think the security level of the guys that I've dated has been iffy. So I haven't come across a guy that has been secure enough to deal with somebody that is out and loud as I am. And it's not just, you know, it's everything. I'm out and loud about it. Life. Be out and loud. You know, I lived for so long as a young child not being able to speak, you know, being told that I had to be quiet.
So you found your voice now.
And when I found my voice, it was like, baby, ain't nobody telling me to shut the hell up.
Okay.
You know.
So I have a question, and this will be my last question. I know you advocate and you do a lot of public speaking on HIV. Now, have you ever got up and spoke on domestic violence?
So that has been the interesting thing, because I feel like when I talk about certain things, like I'll talk about substance use, I'll talk about sexual assault, talk about a lot of things, but domestic violence has been one that I have been trying to still heal from.
Okay.
Those are wounds that have been so instilled deeply into me that I don't want to advocate. I don't get me wrong, I advocate for it, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But as far as sharing my story, this is probably like the first time that I've really shared that piece of me, just because you gotta know your worth. And that has been a long journey for me. And I think I haven't really understood my worth until probably about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
Sad to say that, but about a year and a half ago is when I truly started to really understand my worth. When I got HIV, I always thought my worth was when somebody loves me, which put me in a lot of messed up relationships.
Right.
Because I made the value of myself by the amount of love that someone could give me.
Right.
And that was kind of like that syndrome of like a little girl seeking attention because of her having daddy issues.
Right.
You know, same thing here.
Same
Daddy issues.
thing.
Yeah.
Same thing.
And so, you know, when I found my worth, it has, I don't settle. You know?
It's open. It opens your eyes.
It opened my eyes, but it's far beyond dating. It's far beyond sex. It's about life. It's my work. It's my passion. It's what I choose to show up for.
Right.
You know, I don't have a problem saying no now. Because I feel like if I have to say yes and I can't give my all to something, then I'm not giving me. And what's the point in that? You know, I learned that from Oprah's Super Soul Sundays. But I only say yes to things that I can feel like I can fully invest myself into. And that ultimately it goes beyond me. There's additional benefits and help that come for my brothers and sisters, because although I look like this, I am a man of color. I will be that to the day that I die, and I love being a man of color. I love my heritage. I love my culture. Even though as a mixed people, we really don't have culture. We create our own sometimes. But I love my people, and I feel like if you have the opportunity to be sitting in spaces where you are rubbing shoulders with people that you wouldn't think you would rub shoulders with, you better create them motherfucking opportunities for your brothers and sisters to come and sit at that table, not just to have their voices heard, but for them to be visible, for them to share their experiences, and then for them to pass on the torch to the next generation, because ultimately this is what we do in life. You know, I was talking to y'all earlier, I started watching The Handmaid's Tale, and it's kind of freaking me out a little bit, because I feel like, honestly, I thought it was a period piece, and it really depicts the way that this administration is right now, and the way that a lot of our freedoms are being violated and taken away of, the way that we are forced to believe in terrorism and to be pinned against one another, is very dangerous, and it can create a false sense of reality that we won't wake up till it's too late.
Right. And
I think we have to pay attention. And that's the one thing I will say about Detroit. I love my Detroit brothers and sisters, because we are some activists. I've traveled all across America. I've met people from Amsterdam, from Puerto Rico, and everywhere else. Phenomenal activists and everything else. Don't get me wrong. But Detroit, there has been something about the resilience of the way that we stand up and say no. This does not work for us. This is not going to be our demographic. This will not be for the generations that come up, because we understand that we grew up in an era where, let me be very transparent and clear. I went to school as a young kid, going to elementary, where we would see crackheads and prostitutes, and they didn't scare us. They watched out for us.
Right.
They were the ones going, take your butt to school. They might ask you for some change,
right?
But you know, so you saw the reality of life.
Well, I think too,
it was not filtered.
It wasn't filtered, and it was about neighborhood. It was about community. Yeah. And that's something we don't have now. It's pockets of it, but I think too, with a lot of the shifts of things that's happening here in Detroit, I think that community, even though we're still trying to fight to keep it, I think as much this push we're getting, we got to fight even harder to keep community. Yeah, we really do. You know, and don't be afraid of change. Don't be afraid of big business coming in.
Right. Like they are beneficial. They do create the income into creating the fixes for our infrastructure that we need. The roads are fucking horrible. You know, the car insurance is ridiculous.
Right.
Ridiculous. Even white people in the suburbs are having a hard time with insurance. So you know this is bad. So
no, you know it's bad when your insurance is more than your car note.
Yeah. And you know, it's beyond all of that. Sorry, y'all. It gets a little hot, and you know I'm a snowman. I melt. But yeah, so you know, don't be afraid of change. Don't be afraid of inviting big business into our neighborhoods. But we ultimately need to keep control of our neighborhoods. We ultimately need to have that say so to say, hey, this don't work for this neighborhood.
Exactly.
You know, and we have to be okay with that. We have to compromise. We have to stand strong, put our foot down. Do not bend. We can compromise, but do not bend. That is a different story between the two. Compromising, we can meet somewhere in the middle. Bending means that you are letting go of what you need and what your people need.
Exactly.
No. So.
Can I say one thing before I let you get a final thought? You just made a voice now for domestic violence. So, you know what? Because those words you just said, that might inspire somebody if they need to get out of the situation that they're in. Especially since they see where you came on the other side of this.
Yeah, and it's hard. Don't get me wrong. You know, I get it. Sometimes, I always said that I was never going to be in a relationship that was like that because I saw my mom and my dad go through that.
Right.
Saw my mom love a man to the point of being physically assaulted and beaten and, you know, put down like she was less than nothing. Yeah. And I remember as a young kid seeing that and knowing in my spirit that that wasn't right. That's not life. That's not love.
Right.
And having those conversations with her. And so for me to be in those relationships was a flip for me because I was like, what am I doing here? But I ultimately got it, you know, and when you love somebody, you can't help who you love. And you feel like, you know, if I give it some time, if I try something different, maybe this will change. You know, maybe he won't do this. Maybe she won't do this. Because let's be real, fellas, women can be abusive too. Mm-hmm. You know, and putting your hands on your partner is never the answer. It's never the answer. And I feel like the moment it gets to a point where you feel like it's so frustrating that your hands reach out to touch your partner, that's the moment you should end the relationship. And that goes for both sides. You know, the person that wants to put their hands on them and the person that's being abused. The moment you see that physical violence come around, it's you guys have been bumping heads way too long that you didn't realize that this was not working. So now you're frustrated and now you're at a point where you think physical violence is going to give you the options or the control that you need. And that's a lot of times you have people that have really horrible senses of what control is for them in their lives. And that's where abusers come from. Abusers come from people who have been abused at some point in their life, whether that be physically, emotionally, sexually, whatever. It is a cycle that continuously goes on and on and on. And so you cannot fix that. You are not a doctor. You do not have a degree. You don't have the time or the patience, quite frankly, to sit there and fix somebody that has something deeply rooted in them that you can't help, baby, no matter how much you want to, you know. So you have to have this clear understanding with yourself that in that moment, I always say that when I love somebody, my love is deep. And when I say I love you enough that if you are not happy with me, I will let you go to find your happiness. That's how deep my love goes. My love will push you into your happiness, whether that's with me or not. Right. And so you have to approach love in that sense. Whether that be in relationships or friends, you know, or family, you know, push family out sometimes. But yeah, so.
Any final thoughts?
Love, even in the moments of anger, even in the moments of hate, even in the moments of confusion, love yourself, love your family, love your friends, love your enemies, love the people that sit here and do wrong in this world, because it's through love that we'll find some type of solution.
Well, thank you for doing the show today. I had an awesome time. You're such an awesome person, and just keep up the great work you're doing in the community.
I appreciate that.
And thank you everybody for joining us.